My life has been a gift, and I do try to keep it honest, keep it sharp, keep it interesting.
For years, nobody could make sense of it. Andy Griffith, one of the most loved stars in American TV history, died on the morning of July 3, 2012. But before most people across the country even heard the news, he had already been buried. Just 4 hours and 53 minutes later, no public funeral, no huge memorial, no television cameras waiting outside. Nothing. The media called it suspicious. Fans felt shocked, even hurt, like they were denied a final goodbye to someone they had welcomed into their homes for decades. But the real story behind those 5 hours was not some wild scandal. It was tied to something much deeper. Andy Griffith spent over 50 years giving America the version of himself people wanted to see, while protecting the private man behind the smile at all costs. So who was the real Andy Griffith once the cameras stopped rolling?
Well, I don't know why, but I got out of my seat, walked down the aisle there, got up on stage, put my hands behind me. I knew one song. I sang 2 choruses of Put On Your Old Gray Bonnet, one slow and one fast, and the audience started laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. And I remember the music teacher, her mouth was wide open, laughing.
Who was the man hiding behind Mayberry, behind that calm voice and easy charm everybody trusted? And after all this time, do we finally understand why he was laid to rest only hours after his death? To understand those mysterious 5 hours, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, back to a quiet little town in North Carolina called Mount Airy. Sitting near the Blue Ridge Mountains, the town felt untouched by the fast-moving world around it. Small streets stretched through the community, church steeples stood high above the rooftops, and the smell of pine trees and red clay filled the morning air. People waved from their porches, neighbors knew each other by name, and life moved slow and steady instead of loud and rushed. That was the world Andy Samuel Griffith was born into on June 1st, 1926. And from day one, life was far from easy. His parents, Carl Lee Griffith and Geneva Nunn, worked hard just to keep the family going. Carl took whatever jobs he could find, working as a carpenter and factory laborer during the rough years of the Depression-era South. Money was tight all the time. The Griffith family lived in a tiny house without running water, and there was never much extra of anything. Not extra money, not extra space, and definitely not extra security about what tomorrow might bring. Andy grew up surrounded by the stress and worry that filled many homes during those years. Even as a kid, he understood what struggle looked like. Still, his parents tried to fill their home with faith, discipline, and community values. The family stayed deeply connected to church life, and inside those simple wooden church walls.
And I was so embarrassed. If I could get that laugh again, every time I got up, I'd be well satisfied. But then I was so embarrassed, and people made fun of me for years, but that was my first time to be on stage. And now that I look back on it, it was wonderful. Years later, I went up to Mount Airy and stood in the same spot and sang the same song.
Young Andy discovered the thing that would shape his future forever, his voice. It was not just about singing. It was the feeling his voice created when people heard it. Even as a child, he understood how words could pull people in, calm a room down, or make strangers feel connected. He sang in the church choir before he was even old enough to fully understand the lyrics, but people noticed him immediately. There was something different about the sound of his voice. It felt warm, relaxed, and genuine. It did not sound forced or nervous like most kids his age. It sounded steady, confident, almost like someone much older speaking through him. Even when life around him felt uncertain, Andy carried himself with a quiet confidence that stood out. School became the first real place where he realized that voice could open doors. At Rockford Street Elementary and later Mount Airy High School, Andy was never known as the smartest student in the room or the most decorated academically, but he had something people could not ignore. Whenever he spoke, sang, or performed, people paid attention. And little by little, that small-town boy started realizing his voice could take him much farther than Mount Airy ever could. Andy Griffith was never the star athlete at school. He was not the class president or the kid everybody expected to become famous one day. On paper, he looked ordinary. But the second he stepped onto a stage, everything changed. During school plays and music productions, while other students treated them like small side activities, Andy came alive in a completely different way. People noticed him immediately. You could feel it every time he performed. The crowd watched him closer than anyone else, and one teacher saw that spark before almost anybody did. His drama teacher, Ed Mickey, became one of the first people to truly believe in him. Mickey pushed Andy into every production he could, giving him chance after chance to sharpen his talent. Years later, Andy still talked about him with deep respect, like someone who completely changed the direction of his life. This was the teacher who looked at a struggling kid from a working-class family and told him without doubt, "You have something." Those words stuck with Andy, and eventually they helped carry him all the way to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For somebody from his background, getting there was not some guaranteed path. It felt almost impossible. He arrived in 1944 studying music while focusing on voice and trombone. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by opportunities he never had growing up. But college gave him more than education. It opened his eyes to an entirely different world. Andy suddenly found himself around students from wealthy families, connected families, people who had grown up with advantages he never knew existed. And instead of backing down, he learned something powerful from it all. Talent did not belong only to rich people.
I was the only person in it, terrified. And all I remember, I followed trained camels. And all I remember was there was a blue spot on the stage. And this stage manager, when it came my turn after the camels were done, he said, and I go out on that stage and I do the football monologue to no laughs, none. Now, Ed Sullivan wanted to sign me up for 16 shots. William Morris gave him 4. The next Monday after that Sunday night show, he called wanting out of the other 3. And I'll tell you something, I was glad to let him out.
He realized audiences did not care how much money your family had if you could hold their attention. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his career and shaped nearly every move he made in Hollywood later on. After graduating, Andy briefly worked as a music teacher in Goldsboro, North Carolina. But deep down, he already knew teaching was not where his story ended. Performing kept pulling at him harder and harder, and eventually he gave in to it. He started building a comedy act centered around Southern storytelling. His routines focused on simple country characters trying to understand a fast-changing modern world. The humor felt natural, clever, and relatable instead of polished or fake. Audiences loved it because it sounded real. The routine that changed everything was called What It Was football. In the monologue, Andy played a country preacher attending a college football game for the very first time, trying to explain the chaos through the eyes of somebody completely confused by what he was seeing. The story was hilarious, sharp, and full of personality. When Andy recorded it in 1953, nobody expected what happened next. The record exploded in popularity and sold more than 800,000 copies. Almost overnight, the small-town boy from Mount Airy became a national name. But Broadway was where Andy truly shocked people. In 1955, he starred in No Time for Sergeants, playing Will Stockdale, a sweet but clueless Georgia farm boy drafted into the Air Force. His innocence frustrated military officers while also winning everybody over. Audiences could not get enough of him. Critics praised him non-stop, and suddenly Hollywood started paying very close attention. The success led to the 1957 movie version, But what happened after that surprised almost everybody. Legendary director Elia Kazan cast Andy in A Face in the Crowd, and the role was nothing like the lovable characters audiences expected from him. This time, Andy played Lonesome Rhodes, a charming drifter who manipulated the public while secretly looking down on the very people supporting him. The performance shocked audiences because it was dark, intense, and deeply unsettling. Gone was the harmless country boy image.
I remember this too, because I did another show in that same theater. They had a camera on you this way, and they had a camera on you this way, and they wanted you to play to that camera, but the audience was out here. So that whole time I'm doing the monologue, there's a guy out there going like this. And I'm trying to play to the audience. It was tough.
In its place was a calculating, dangerous figure hiding behind a friendly smile. Critics were blown away by how convincing he was. Many called it one of the strongest screen debuts of that era. And just like that, Andy Griffith proved he was far more than the safe, charming Southern character people thought they knew. The real tragedy, even if nobody saw it that way back then, was that Hollywood had no clue what to do with the darker side of Andy Griffith. His performance in A Face in the Crowd proved he could play complicated, intense characters with shocking precision. The talent was obvious, but studios were nervous. They did not want danger or edge from Andy Griffith. They wanted comfort. They wanted charm. They wanted the friendly Southern smile that made audiences feel safe. So when television producer Sheldon Leonard came to him in 1960 with an idea about a small-town sheriff living in a fictional North Carolina town called Mayberry, Andy made the decision that would shape the rest of his entire life. He said yes. At the time, it probably looked like the perfect career move. But what Andy really accepted was a trade. Fame in exchange for privacy. Public love in exchange for personal freedom. And like a lot of choices made during moments of ambition, the true price would not become clear until years later, when there was no way to take it back. The Andy Griffith Show premiered on October 3, 1960, and almost instantly, something unbelievable happened. The audience connection went far beyond simple entertainment. America did not just enjoy the show, people clung to it emotionally. The country was going through massive tension at the time. The Cold War created fear in everyday life. The civil rights movement was exposing painful divisions across the South. A younger generation wanted change, while older generations struggled to keep up. The future felt uncertain, fast-moving, and unstable. And then came Mayberry. Quiet streets, familiar faces, simple problems with simple solutions. In the middle of all the chaos happening across America, the show gave viewers something they desperately missed: peace. Sheriff Andy Taylor was completely different from the tough television heroes audiences were used to seeing. He did not walk around looking for fights. He rarely carried a gun. Instead of solving problems with force, he used patience, humor, and understanding. Even the way he raised his son, Opie, felt different for television at that time.
Steve would sat on a stool by me. I'd be on a stool, he'd be on a stool by me. And as I was doing my monologue, he would get tickled. And when he got tickled, the audience got tickled. And then I got tickled. And it just went on, and we built and built. And so that's how I started working with Steve on the show. And I loved Steve. He was great to comics.
He showed warmth, affection, and emotional openness that many fathers rarely expressed publicly back then. Andy Taylor became more than just a character. To millions of viewers, he represented the version of America they wished still existed. Honest, calm, decent, and fair. He was wise without acting superior, funny without humiliating people, and principled without sounding harsh or judgmental. Audiences trusted him completely. For 8 seasons, the series dominated television. By its final season, it finished #1 in the Nielsen ratings, something extremely rare for a long-running show. The success also created Gomer Pyle, one of the most popular spin-offs in TV history. Careers were launched, television history was made, and the sound of that famous whistled theme song became permanently tied to American culture. Even decades later, hearing it still hits people emotionally. But behind the warmth of Mayberry, cracks were quietly starting to form. Because the truth was simple. Andy Griffith was not actually Sheriff Andy Taylor. And the gap between the real man and the image America demanded from him kept growing wider every single year. Fans stopped seeing him as an actor and started treating him like the character himself. Strangers would approach him in grocery stores, restaurants, and airports, calling him Sheriff with almost unbelievable admiration. The public wanted him to always be calm, wise, and comforting, even when real life was far more complicated. People who worked closely with Andy during those years described someone full of contradictions. He could be incredibly generous one moment and emotionally distant the next. Sometimes he showed deep kindness and loyalty, and other times he could turn cold, impatient, and sharply critical without warning. Behind that easy smile America fell in love with, there was clearly another side most viewers never fully saw. Don Knotts, Andy Griffith's co-star and one of the closest friends he ever had in the business, once admitted that Andy carried a heaviness behind the laughter. Even during the height of the Andy Griffith Show, there was a restlessness inside him that never fully disappeared. The calm world of Mayberry could not completely hide it. Behind the scenes, real life was becoming harder to hold together. Andy's first marriage, to his college sweetheart Barbara Bray Edwards, quietly fell apart in 1972 after 20 years together. People close to them believed fame slowly wore the relationship down over time. The long work schedules, constant attention, and pressure of always being seen as America's favorite small-town hero created cracks that kept getting deeper. Being famous sounds glamorous from the outside.
We got to be friends immediately. And he used to come up to my dressing room every now and then, and this one night he came up and he was going to play a man who had never made a speech before, called on after somebody fell out. And so he ended up making a speech, and his hands are shaking and his voice is shaking, and he said, "You think that's funny?" And I said, "Oh Lord, yes, that's funny." And that was the beginning of the nervous man that he did on Steve Allen for so many years.
But for Andy, it also became a trap. The public wanted him to represent comfort and stability at all times, while his private life was growing more complicated and painful. Trying to be both a television icon and a normal husband and father became almost impossible. Their son, Andy Jr., who was known as Sam, reportedly carried emotional scars from the family struggles for many years afterward. Their adopted daughter, Dixie, rarely spoke publicly about that period, and when she did, her words were usually careful and guarded. The silence around those years said a lot by itself. In 1973, Andy married actress Solika Kasuto, but that relationship also ended quietly after 6 years. 2 marriages had now collapsed, and the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. The version of Andy Griffith seen on television and the man living behind closed doors no longer seemed connected at all. They felt like 2 completely different people. Then came another move that shocked Hollywood. In 1968, at the absolute peak of the Andy Griffith Show, Andy decided to walk away. Most television stars hold on to hit shows for as long as possible, terrified the success may never come again. Andy did the opposite. He left while the series was still dominating ratings. He said he was exhausted. He wanted new creative challenges and hoped to prove he was capable of more than just playing Sheriff Andy Taylor. But what followed turned into one of the hardest periods of his professional life. His 1969 dramatic film, Angel in My Pocket, failed to create much excitement. Other projects followed, television specials, movies, guest appearances, but none of them connected with audiences in the same powerful way. The darker, more layered actor critics once praised in a face in the crowd suddenly seemed forgotten by Hollywood. Meanwhile, audiences only wanted one thing from him. They wanted Mayberry. They wanted the familiar smile, the calm advice, and the comforting image they had trusted for years. Andy kept resisting that expectation, but resisting came with a price. By the middle of the 1970s, he found himself stuck in a strange kind of professional isolation. He was still respected, still famous, still deeply loved by older audiences, but the spotlight had moved on. Projects came and went without making much impact. For a man who had once been one of the biggest faces on television, the quiet decline hit hard. There is a special loneliness that comes when someone spends years at the center of American culture and then slowly realizes the world has stopped paying attention. Andy drifted through that period carrying exactly that feeling. Then, in 1986, everything changed again with Matlock. Andy stepped into the role of Ben Matlock, a clever Atlanta defense attorney known for his Southern charm, sharp courtroom tactics, and love of hot dogs. In many ways, the character gave audiences everything they already loved about Andy Griffith. The warmth was still there. The humor was still there. The slow, confident Southern style was still impossible to ignore. But Matlock also allowed Andy to show something deeper and more complicated than Mayberry ever did. Ben Matlock could outsmart people, manipulate situations in court, and keep his true strategy hidden until the perfect moment. There was a sharper edge beneath the charm this time.
I didn't like it, and I told Mr. Lasvogel, I said, you know, I've struck out at movies and movies and theater now, and I don't want to go back to nightclub. Maybe I should try television.
For once, Andy finally had a character that balanced both sides of who he was. The comforting public figure audiences adored, and the more complex performer Hollywood had underestimated for years. Matlock ran for 9 seasons and pulled off something almost nobody expected. Andy Griffith became a massive television star for the second time in his life. Very few actors ever managed to reinvent themselves that successfully after already defining one entire era of television. But Matlock gave Andy more than ratings and popularity. It gave him something he had been missing for years: control. During the Andy Griffith Show years, Andy often felt trapped by the image audiences forced onto him. But with Matlock, he had more influence over the work, more confidence in his role, and more freedom to shape the character the way he wanted. Still, while his career was climbing again, his private struggles were becoming more serious behind the scenes. In 1983, Andy was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that attacks the body's nervous system. The condition was terrifying and extremely painful. For a period of time, the paralysis became so severe that he completely lost the ability to walk. This was not just a health scare. For Andy, it was emotionally devastating. His entire career had been built around presence, energy, and connection. Whether on stage or television, he knew how to command attention simply by walking into a room. Suddenly, his body stopped cooperating, and he was left lying still, unsure if he would ever fully recover. The fear that came with that experience stayed with him deeply. Andy rarely spoke publicly about the illness, and when he did, he chose his words carefully. But people could still hear the fear underneath the calm voice. The uncertainty shook him in ways most fans never realized. His recovery happened slowly and painfully. Even after improving, the illness left lasting effects on him physically and emotionally. People who worked with him during the later Matlock years noticed clear changes. He moved more cautiously. He seemed more guarded and aware of his physical limitations, almost as if he no longer completely trusted his own body the way he once had. The experience also changed how he thought about fame, privacy, and aging. Around this time, Andy reportedly started opening up more in private conversations about something that had quietly grown inside him for decades: his desire to disappear from public life completely. Not disappear because he failed, He had already lived through career struggles during the 1970s and hated every second of it. This was different. What he wanted now was privacy by choice. After spending over 30 years giving audiences exactly what they wanted, he became fiercely protective of the little personal space he still had left. Andy had watched other celebrity deaths turn into giant media spectacles, cameras outside hospitals, endless television coverage, public memorials that sometimes felt more focused on ratings than grieving families. He hated the idea of his death becoming entertainment for strangers. To him, it looked like famous people lost ownership of their lives and then lost ownership of their deaths, too. He wanted no part of that world when his own time came. In private conversations with his wife, Cindy Knight, whom he married in 1983, Andy made his wishes very clear. Friends and people close to the family often described Cindy as one of the most stabilizing and calming influences in his adult life.
Dandy Thomas, Sheldon Leonard, and a man named Artie Stander, who wrote the pilot, yelled at one another all day. I said that first. I said that an hour ago, in a lot of profanity. And at the end of that first day, I asked Sheldon if I could speak to him.
With her, Andy finally seemed more at peace than he had been in years. And when they discussed death, he did not speak vaguely or avoid the topic. He talked about it directly, carefully, and with complete certainty. He had already decided exactly how he wanted things handled, and he reportedly refused to compromise on it. When the time came, there would be no giant public event, no drawn-out media circus, no dramatic farewell for television cameras. He wanted everything handled privately and quickly. Andy planned for his burial to take place on Roanoke Island, where he had spent years living away from Hollywood's noise in a secluded coastal home. The quiet atmosphere there gave him something fame never could: distance from the spotlight. Surrounded by salt air, water, and peace, he finally found a place where the outside world couldn't constantly reach him. And more than anything, Andy Griffith wanted it all finished before the world had time to turn his death into one more public performance. What Andy Griffith asked from his family was not especially shocking for someone who valued privacy. Plenty of public figures quietly hope for peaceful funerals away from cameras and reporters. What made Andy's situation so unusual was how completely his family carried out those wishes, and how fast everything happened. On the morning of July 3rd, 2012, Andy Griffith woke up for the final time at his home on Roanoke Island. By then, his health had been declining for quite a while. His heart had grown weaker over the years, and the lasting effects from Guillain-Barré syndrome had reportedly taken a heavy toll on his body. People close to him already understood the reality of the situation. The end was coming. There were no dramatic final speeches or emotional scenes designed for the public. No carefully staged goodbye for cameras. Just the quiet reality of an aging man reaching the final chapter of a long and complicated life. After 86 years, his body was simply giving out. Andy died at home with his wife Cindy beside him, exactly where he wanted to be. And what happened next was not rushed chaos or confusion. It was a plan that had already been carefully prepared ahead of time. At the time of his death, North Carolina law allowed private burials on personal property under certain legal conditions. Permits were still required, but local officials could process them very quickly when circumstances justified it. The Griffith family reportedly worked closely with authorities who understood both the legal process and Andy's intense desire for privacy. Everything moved with incredible speed. Before the public even knew he had passed away, the burial was already finished. Within less than 5 hours of his death, Andy Griffith had been laid to rest on his Roanoke Island property. No public announcement had been released beforehand. No television networks were warned. No media crews had time to gather outside his home. By the time news stations finally reported his death to the country, there was nothing left for photographers to capture and no funeral spectacle left to broadcast. Reporters rushed to Roanoke Island, searching for details, but there were no dramatic scenes waiting for them. No crowds, no public memorial, no emotional television coverage, The exact kind of media circus Andy feared during his final years never had the chance to happen. The public reaction exploded almost immediately, and opinions were sharply divided. Some longtime fans felt deeply hurt by how quickly everything was handled. For people who had spent decades watching him on television, Andy Griffith felt almost like part of their own family. Many believed they deserved a chance to say goodbye publicly.
without having to go for a joke. Some of them didn't have any jokes at all. Some of them did. And we could also go outside with 3 cameras. You're pretty well locked into 2 or 3 sets. With 1 camera, you got all of the outdoors and the whole town of Mayberry and everything. So
Newspapers received emotional letters from viewers, online discussions filled with confusion, sadness, and frustration. Some fans openly questioned how the family could move so fast. Others asked whether someone as beloved as Andy Griffith really belonged only to his family after spending so much of his life in the homes of millions of Americans. But many people understood the decision immediately. To them, the speed and silence of the burial felt like one final message from Andy himself. It was the clearest possible reminder that the lovable television character people adored was never the complete picture. Sheriff Andy Taylor belonged to America's memory of Mayberry, but Andy Griffith, the private man behind the fame, belonged only to himself. The fans who felt emotional about the burial were not wrong for feeling that pain. What they were grieving, in many ways, was the comforting image they had carried for years. But Andy's family was focused on protecting the real person behind that image, the man who spent decades trying to keep part of his life untouched by fame. And the legal process that allowed the burial to happen so quickly was not some secret trick or rushed loophole. It was a lawful option that happened to perfectly fit the final wish of a man determined to leave this world on his own terms. The private burial law was not some hidden trick pulled together at the last second. It existed specifically for situations like this, for families who wanted to bury loved ones privately without turning the process into a public event controlled by outside institutions or media attention. Andy Griffith's team had already researched everything carefully ahead of time. His wishes were documented clearly, and when the moment came, the plan unfolded exactly the way he wanted. The speed of it stunned the country, but to the people who truly knew Andy, it made perfect sense. Ron Howard, who famously played Opie Taylor as a child and stayed close to Andy throughout his life, spoke publicly in the days after the burial. His comments carried sadness, but not criticism. He understood why it happened the way it did. According to Howard, that was Andy. He did things his way. That short statement explained almost everything. Don Knotts, Andy's longtime friend and co-star, had passed away 6 years earlier in 2006. He never saw the final chapter unfold. But people who knew both men well believed Knotts probably would not have been surprised by the private burial at all. In fact, many felt he would have recognized it immediately as classic Andy Griffith behavior, stubborn, deeply personal, and completely authentic. That same stubbornness had reportedly made Andy both incredible and frustrating to work with during their years together on television. He could be warm and loyal one moment, then impossible to change his mind the next. But underneath it all, Andy almost always followed his own instincts, even when the world disagreed with him. Cindy Knight Griffith stayed almost completely silent publicly after his death. She did not rush into television interviews or release emotional public statements. Instead, she disappeared into the same privacy her husband had spent years protecting. For many people close to the family, that silence itself became part of honoring him. She was not just protecting Andy's final request. She was protecting the entire philosophy he had developed during the last decades of his life, the belief that fame should never erase a person's right to private moments, especially in death.
if it sounds like a joke, it's a joke, throw it out. Unless you present it as a joke, of course. And we also did another important thing. we never wanted to make a lie out of the characters. So anything that made the characters seem wrong or going in the wrong direction for that particular story we were telling, we'd throw that out.
Even today, Andy Griffith's grave on Roanoke Island remains private. There is no giant public memorial marking the location, no flashy museum exhibit, no heavily advertised tourist destination for grieving fans. People still travel to the Carolina coast, hoping to feel some connection to him. But the exact resting place remains shielded from public attention. Instead, there is only the quiet island itself, the ocean air, the sound of water hitting the shoreline, a peaceful place that keeps its silence the same way Andy Griffith always tried to protect parts of himself from the outside world. And that is where the deeper question begins. Even after people learned the full story behind those 5 hours, one difficult question continued hanging over everything. Not a legal question, but a personal one. Did Andy Griffith owe the public something more? The answer depends entirely on which version of Andy Griffith people are mourning. If someone is mourning Sheriff Andy Taylor, the calm sheriff with the fishing pole, the comforting smile, and the gentle wisdom that made Mayberry feel real, then the sadness many fans felt makes complete sense. That character became part of American life for generations. People trusted him, loved him, and carried those memories through some of the country's hardest decades. In many ways, Mayberry stopped belonging only to television. It became emotional property shared by millions of people who found comfort in it year after year. From that perspective, some fans believed Andy owed the audience a final public goodbye after receiving so much love for so long. But if someone is mourning Andy Samuel Griffith, the poor boy from Mount Airy who grew up struggling through hard times, discovered his voice in church, and later shocked Hollywood with the dark intensity of a face in the crowd before the industry pushed him back into safer roles, then the private burial feels completely different. Suddenly, those 5 hours no longer seem cold or mysterious. They feel deeply personal, almost heartbreaking in their honesty. That private side of Andy Griffith had been fighting for space almost his entire adult life. Ever since the Andy Griffith Show exploded in 1960, every year became a balancing act between the real man and the version of him the public desperately wanted to believe in. Every season of Mayberry came with pressure. Every fan interaction carried expectations. People did not just want Andy Griffith the actor. They wanted Sheriff Andy Taylor standing in front of them at all times. Every smile, every handshake, every public appearance became another reminder that millions of people saw him less as a person and more as a symbol of comfort and nostalgia. Then came Matlock, where he tried to reshape that image while still giving audiences enough familiarity to keep them connected. Even there, Andy was constantly trying to find the line between what viewers expected from him.
And we spent a lot of time working on our scripts as well. All of us. On Thursday was our script day. And we would sometimes work late into the night on Thursday.
And what parts of himself he still wanted to protect. And while all of this played out publicly, private struggles kept piling up quietly in the background. Marriages collapsed under the weight of fame. Serious illness shook his confidence and reminded him how fragile life really was. The difficult professional years during the 1970s left emotional scars that never fully disappeared. Piece by piece, the pressure of spending decades as a national symbol slowly added up. Through all of it, what Andy Griffith seemed to want most was actually something incredibly simple: privacy. Not isolation, not bitterness, not hiding from the world completely. He just wanted the freedom to exist like an ordinary man sometimes. He wanted to walk to his mailbox without becoming a public event. He wanted to sit on his porch without strangers treating the moment like a tourist attraction. He wanted to grow old quietly and eventually die in his own home without television cameras turning the moment into non-stop coverage. After 50 years in the spotlight, he felt he had earned that right. What Andy Griffith left behind was bigger than television history alone. His life also became a powerful example of the difference between the image people perform for the world and the private self they protect underneath it all. And maybe one of the strongest choices a person can make is refusing to let those two identities completely merge together. That is the deeper meaning behind those mysterious 5 hours after his death. Beyond the legal paperwork, beyond the headlines, beyond the public shock, the story was really about a man who spent decades watching fame consume people around him and deciding he would not allow the same thing to happen to him. Andy had seen what celebrity culture could do. He watched famous people slowly disappear into the public versions of themselves until there was barely anything authentic left underneath. He saw grief transformed into entertainment. He saw celebrity funerals turned into giant televised finales. The same entertainment industry that made stars rich and beloved also had a habit of turning their deaths into programming opportunities. Emotional tributes became ratings events. Endless coverage filled television screens for days, only for the media machine to move on almost immediately afterward. Andy clearly wanted no part of that cycle. And his decision was not some emotional last-minute panic. It was not the sudden fear of an elderly man avoiding attention at the end. It was the final step in a philosophy he had quietly built for decades. Andy Griffith always seemed to understand something fame often destroys: the difference between what someone does and who they truly are. What Andy did was perform, and he performed at an incredibly high level for most of his life. 8 seasons of The Andy Griffith Show, 9 seasons of Matlock. A successful recording career that started with a funny football monologue and later expanded into gospel music that connected deeply with loyal listeners. For decades, he delivered work that audiences loved and the industry respected, even when Hollywood sometimes overlooked just how talented he really was. But who Andy Griffith actually was underneath all the fame never fully changed. At his core, he remained the boy from Mount Airy, the carpenter's son, the church choir singer, the young man who stepped onto a Broadway stage carrying little more than a powerful voice, a story to tell, and the stubborn belief that he belonged there no matter what anybody else thought. Before finding lasting peace with Cindy Knight, Andy Griffith went through 2 failed marriages that left emotional damage behind.
Nobody could play Barney except Don Knotts. And Don Knotts, by the way, was not Barney Fife. Don Knotts was far away from Barney Fife, but he could become Barney Fife right in front of you.
By many accounts, Cindy became the partner who finally brought stability into a life that had often felt divided between public success and private struggle. As a father, Andy's relationships with his children were also complicated. Fame demanded huge pieces of his time and energy, and like many major stars of his era, balancing career and family was not always easy. Some people close to him believed he often seemed more comfortable connecting through a television screen than inside the quiet reality of everyday family life. It was one of the painful contradictions that followed him for years, and that real version of Andy Griffith, not the perfect television image, but the flawed, complicated, deeply human man underneath it all, was the person his family believed deserved a private goodbye. Not the polished version built by Mayberry, not the television icon measured by ratings and fame, not the celebrity tribute package that networks easily could have turned into a giant emotional event filled with old clips, dramatic music, famous guest appearances, and nostalgic speeches. What Andy wanted reflected the life he actually lived near the end. Quiet, personal, grounded. A final resting place on a peaceful North Carolina island beside the woman he loved, surrounded by the salt air and calm atmosphere he chose over the noise of Hollywood. Even now, his grave remains hidden from the public. There is no giant marker visible from the road, no official tourist map showing visitors exactly where to go. Roanoke Island does not market itself around being the burial site of a television legend, because Andy Griffith specifically did not want that kind of attention. The island simply exists on its own terms, quiet, historic, and completely uninterested in celebrity culture or television ratings. And in many ways, that quiet indifference feels exactly like the peace Andy spent his whole life searching for. Mount Airy, though, carries a very different relationship with his memory. The North Carolina town that inspired Mayberry still feels deeply connected to him decades later. The streets, barbershops, courthouse, and local landmarks tied to the show continue drawing visitors from across the country. But the way the town honors Andy feels more personal than commercial. It is less about spectacle and more about pride. The kind of pride small towns carry when one of their own becomes part of something larger than themselves. There is a statue honoring him. Every year, fans gather for Mayberry Day celebrations, and when people walk through Mount Airy, there is still a strong feeling that something meaningful truly started there. A real boy once walked those sidewalks, absorbed the rhythms of that small-town life, and later carried pieces of it into every performance he gave. No matter how much time passes, Andy Griffith and Mount Airy remain permanently connected.
I'm an internal actor. That is, I take whatever material we're doing, so it looks like it's coming out of, it's hard to explain, the character I'm playing, but actually I'm bringing it into myself in doing that. Don brought all these emotions that Barney felt. He brought them into himself, and then it would go into his mind, and then I could see it in his eyes. I could see his eyes turn into Barney Fife. And I was often closer to him than I am to you now. We'd be at least half that distance, maybe more. So I'm really close to him, and I could see him do it. We called it the memory bit.
That bond survived television fame, career changes, and even the secrecy surrounding his burial. Nothing could fully separate the man from the place that shaped him. And that is the strange contradiction at the center of Andy Griffith's life story. More than almost anything else, he wanted privacy. He fought hard to protect it, especially during his later years. In many ways, the entire structure of his final chapter was built around keeping parts of himself away from public consumption. But at the same time, the very things he created made complete privacy almost impossible. The comfort of Mayberry, the charm of Matlock, the warmth in his voice during those gospel recordings. Those performances connected so deeply with people that audiences never stopped feeling personally attached to him. The reason Andy Griffith's story still refuses to fade away is simple. What he created connected too deeply with people. His work was warm, honest, comforting, and human in a way that generations of viewers never forgot. Even though he chose privacy and death, his memory still lives almost everywhere. It lives in the reruns still playing on quiet Sunday afternoons. It lives in families who grew up watching Mayberry together year after year. It even lives in the parents who named their children Opie because the name came to represent kindness, innocence, and something genuinely good. And somehow, even now, people still catch themselves humming that familiar whistle theme song during stressful days or difficult moments without fully realizing why. That kind of connection does not disappear easily. It stays with people for life. That became the strange legacy of a man who never seemed interested in building a legacy at all. Andy Griffith did not spend his final years chasing attention or trying to remain the center of Hollywood. More than anything, he simply wanted peace.
And that spring, I quit teaching and started doing shows for civic clubs around the state of North Carolina. And got to where I was working, there were slow periods, but I did nice shows. We were funny and one on one of them I did the football thing and things like that. And so my life has been a gift, and I do try to keep it honest, keep it sharp, keep it interesting. And I don't think I'm up to doing another series. I'm 80 years old now.
He wanted to live quietly on his island, enjoy the life he built away from cameras, and walk to his mailbox without turning into a headline. In the end, he got exactly what he asked for. And somehow, while protecting his own privacy, he still left millions of people with something meaningful they carried into their own lives. The lesson running through Andy Griffith's journey, from singing in a small church choir in Mount Airy to being buried quietly on Roanoke Island, is not complicated. In fact, it is surprisingly simple. Fame can become a costume. Wear it long enough and people start forgetting there is a real person underneath it. The world begins treating the image as if it belongs to everyone. But Andy Griffith never fully forgot the difference between the public version of himself and the private man trying to protect what little normal life he had left. And maybe that was the bravest thing he ever did. In a world constantly trying to claim ownership over famous people, Andy Griffith held onto himself until the very end. 4 hours and 53 minutes after he took his final breath on a summer morning in North Carolina, he was laid to rest exactly the way he wanted. No giant media event, no dramatic television finale, no endless circus of cameras and headlines, just the island, just the silence, just a man finally finding peace after spending a lifetime trying to protect it. If this story connected with you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone. And most importantly, leave a comment below letting us know your favorite memory of Andy Griffith or what his story means to you today.